So with the current lunar race being underway, the truth about the Apollo missions will be revealed sooner rather than later. This is my opinion. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Let's talk about the lunar landings. Yes, this topic that I've been shying away from for quite a while, and actually recently, only recently, I thought about making a video about it. I even asked in the community posts, maybe I'll show you the post, maybe I won't, to give some ideas about this topic, and I made some research of my own, and well, came to some interesting conclusions, let's put it this way. Well, first I wanted to just frame this video as me asking questions, you know, without making any statements, because proving something in religion is very hard, and let's make no joke about it. Like, the lunar landing is a religious topic. It's essentially unfalsifiable. Like, no amount of evidence would convince any person in whether they have or haven't been correct. I would say so, at the very least, okay? So sociologically, it's a religious topic at the very least, just like climate change, for example. So consider a Santa Claus problem, if I may say so, as an example. So surely all these billions of people all over the world wouldn't just, you know, spend billions of dollars, buy all these Christmas trees, like all the decorations, all the lamps, all the gifts. Like, there can't be a conspiracy as big as that. What does that mean? It means Santa Claus must be real, right? So it's the same argument that surely NASA and America in general cannot have spent billions of dollars buying all these Christmas trees, you know, Saturn V rockets, and all the wrappings around them and all the lamps and all the decorations and stuff. Like, surely the lunar landing is real. Like, we're dealing with something like that, like a quasi-religious object and the cult around it, okay? I'm not just saying it in a bad way, by the way. It's just like culturally, sociologically, this is what we're dealing with. So yeah, so this is sort of a ritual of summoning. The landings were like a religious ritual to unify the American nation. And it largely succeeded, actually, though not completely. You know, they've still had problems with Vietnam. They still, you know, have this famous poem of Whitey on the Moon. So all the, you know, internal racial problems within the United States, and all kinds of narratives like that. But mostly they have succeeded, I have to say, the Apollo program, right? Because in the late 60s, like, people were listening to some amazing music, like, objectively speaking, right? They were watching some amazing cinema. There were people doing drugs, obviously, right? So it would make sense to perform some sort of a nationwide trip to the moon, you know? If you haven't been to the moon in your trips, you're not tripping hard enough, my boy, right? So yeah, and since then, it once again is perceived, this summoning ritual, this trip that they undertook as a nation, with religious fervor again. So no rational examination of actual evidence is possible here, nor it is needed, honestly, or even welcome, okay? So, you know, these, like, again, when I was thinking about making my own video, like, I immediately thought about all these typical videos that bloggers do, specifically space bloggers on the topic, you know, like, the waving flag, the absence of stars, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, all these questions are already super standardized. The answers are already super standardized. Like, it seems, again, that it's also actually a ritual for the bloggers themselves, or any sort of journalists, to undergo as a sort of an initiation procedure, you know, like, now you're certainly one of us, now that you've debunked the lunar hoax conspiracy, you know, something like that. So yeah, so all of it is honestly really lame and boring. So the only way I've found, which would be kind of useful for me to make this video in, I guess, I hope this was a correct sentence. So at least in the English-speaking sphere, is to approach it with at least a couple of anecdotes that you probably haven't known about or didn't think about. Okay? Obviously, there is plenty of evidence on top of it. Like, if you wanna, you can ask me in the comments if there's something you don't understand, or actually, there's something I don't understand, of course. This is always a possibility. Not just a possibility. There's still a couple of things I don't understand, but let's just begin talking about this. So, a couple of factual things I will reveal to you in this video a couple of considerations, let's put it this way. Let's not like jump on our high horse, let's just speak like normal human beings, okay? Let's consider, for starters, the Apollo 6 launch, which happened in April of 1968. So this actually, in my opinion, looks like an actual launch of Saturn V rocket in its true configuration. So you cannot fake something like that, all right? At least this is my opinion. Again, maybe somebody can fake something like that. I don't know. So what was observed during the Apollo 6 launch? What was observed is that the F1 engine, which we've had 5 on the first stage, that's why it's called Saturn V, right? It's inherently unstable. In particular, it undergoes the so-called pogo oscillation, where the rocket like oscillates like a spring, like a pogo stick, right? That's why it's called pogo oscillations. So the telemetry was going crazy, all kinds of stuff was shutting down, all kinds of stuff was unnecessarily switching on, etc. And as a result, the upper stages failed. Both of them actually, like 3 engines out of 11 have failed, have malfunctioned. So, after that, like a few months after that, on October 7th, NASA Director James Webb, yes, it's the same James Webb, by the way, steps down. That's an interesting tidbit, right? After the Apollo 6 launch. Actually, 4 days before Apollo 7 launch, he steps down, which is kind of interesting, right? Considering Abraham Lincoln's words, like, you don't change horses midstream. Like, supposedly it's a very successful program. Like, why is the management resigning right in the middle of it, right? In the middle, like, before a very important launch. Actually, Apollo 7, I think, was the first crewed launch, but they've used Saturn I rocket, so we're just gonna kind of ignore it. All right, so NASA director resigns after Apollo 6. Then on December 6th, actually, Wernher von Braun himself is effectively fired as a head of Marshall Space Flight Center, and I quote Braun's own memo, "In view of the changing missions and roles of this center." And I wonder what he meant by this, all right? What was the changing missions and roles of this center after they figured that the Saturn V rocket is malfunctioning? I don't know. Let's think about this. I mean, it's a rhetorical question, obviously. So the very next launch of Saturn V was with people on board. That was Apollo 8 in December 1968, like a couple of weeks after von Braun was effectively fired. Like, technically he was fired a couple of years afterwards, but he wasn't doing anything already at that point. And so not just they launched the same rocket that was malfunctioning, they sent it all the way to the moon right away. Apollo 8 mission, okay? And I'll remind you, maybe you actually didn't know that no American spacecraft has ever returned from the moon at that point. And in December of 1968. There have been no automatic stations, nothing sent and returned from the moon, okay? Before that, before Apollo 8. So just think about this. We're taking a malfunctioning rocket, like the last launch was essentially a failure. We're putting people on it, and we're sending it to where no other spacecraft of ours has ever, like, survived return from. Is this a reasonable space program? Like, again, a rhetorical question, really, if you think about it. But just like, are we sure in this context it's the USSR that is the empire of evil, or evil empire here? Actually, if you look into USSR space program, it makes absolutely perfect sense, and was very humane in every respect, again, compared to what Apollo just did, what I just told you, okay? So all the necessary steps are in the Soviet space program. It looks very logical what they did, okay? What NASA did makes no sense whatsoever, right? So no wonder, in my opinion, that Webb and von Braun were not on board for this, okay? Because objectively, it's a self-deletion, YouTube rules kind of mission that they did. With Apollo 8, I mean. So if it would have taken place in real life, that would be a self-deletion mission. If you know what I mean, but you know what I mean. And the icing on the cake, we're kind of jumping forward. Like, we're skipping the actual landings, because again, in this context, I mean, everything is clear already, right? We're not dealing with a real space program. Where we have dealt with a real space program, was Biosattelite 3. I'm pretty sure you've never heard about it. Again, I'm gonna link it in the description. Maybe I'll show you some, like, a screenshot from Wiki. So, again, it was launched in June of 1969. And it had a monkey in it, okay? So the objective was to hold a monkey in space for 30 days. Why? Well, to get medical info about weightlessness, okay? But, my guys, like, stick to your own scenario. Allegedly, at this point, there were already a Gemini 5 mission launch, which has survived in space for 8 days with people on board, okay? There was Gemini 7 with 2 people on board as well for 14 days in space. There were allegedly, again, Apollo 7, actually Apollo 7 through Apollo 10, all lasting from like 7 to 10 days each. Why do you have to send, like, don't you have enough medical info from these missions already on humans? Why are you torturing a poor monkey, you know? By the way, monkey died after 9 days, which also kind of tells you something, alright? Which we're not gonna consider here. Well, short comment, like, in a tight space, in weightlessness, like, you basically die upon return. If you spend there for like, you know, roughly speaking, 2 weeks, it's kind of deadly, but that's a separate topic. So yeah, maybe not even 2 weeks, but again, I don't want to being distracted by this sort of info. So yeah, why do you torture a poor monkey? Like, are you preparing an orbital zoo or something? Like, you already have human data. Like, what's the problem, supposedly, again? And it's a rhetorical question, just one more rhetorical question. But in a reasonable space program, of course, animal tests would precede human tests, which means, you know what it means. Now, a lot of people are asking this question, and this is actually used as one of the arguments in favor of the belief in the landings, is why didn't the Soviets interfere? So, like, they supposedly have had data that the American missions are fake, okay? I mean, supposedly, again, according to the other side of the argument, let's put it this way. So, let's first look at the factual side of things. So, again, one of the things which people assume to be obvious, but which is not obvious at all, actually, I mean, most of the people are mistaken on this account, is that the Soviet Union, this is a statement, the Soviet Union did not ever observe the Apollo spacecraft anywhere higher than low Earth orbit, neither optically nor in radio waves. It just never happened, period. Alright? People actually recently, on the Russian side, have made requests to Russian Ministry of Defense, Russian Academy of Sciences, various institutions in Russia that are dealing, you know, with space stuff and space stuff and such, let's put it this way, okay? So, and everywhere, the answer is the same. There were no such observations. Like, they just didn't. They never observed Apollo missions, period. Or, if you have the contrary information, again, please name organization, or maybe an observatory, or a name of a private astronomer who did so on the Soviet side. Again, all available evidence indicates that no one ever did. The Soviets definitely observed the launches, of course. Why did they? Well, because the Cape Canaveral has like 10 installations for launches of like military ballistic missiles, both with satellites and with like, you know, warheads. So only like a couple of sites there actually devoted to civilian and scientific programs, right? So the Soviet ships were definitely in the vicinity, like somewhere nearby, always observing these launches. So they knew that something is launched, but they never observed it in space, at least farther than the LEO, low Earth orbit, okay? And with regards to that, I want to tell you another anecdote that you probably are unaware of. So it's the anecdote of the U.S. Coastal Guard cutter Southwind, that's the name of the ship, visiting Murmansk, that is the Russian port in the Arctic, in September of 1970, okay? To retrieve what was referred to as a boilerplate capsule. So what is a boilerplate capsule? Again, it's NASA terminology. It's basically a mock-up Apollo command module. So they used it in tests, apparently, at least supposedly, right? So it would mimic like the weight and the shape of the actual Apollo command module, but it was basically just a lump of iron of the same shape, right? So it had no scientific or military or whatever value, okay? But again, this ship, Southwind, actually took effort to travel through the Atlantic. It actually, like, the way it traveled is very suspicious, but again, they tried to keep it under the radar, this meeting, but still it visited Murmansk. By the way, it was the first time that American ship has visited Soviet Union after World War II. you know, after Lend-Lease help in World War II. So it was kind of funny in this respect. It kind of, you know, makes you ask some questions. And the funny thing about this boilerplate, supposedly, is that there is absolutely no data, like no American organization has any data on where it comes from, who made it, like who lost it in the first place, right? Because the Soviets apparently somehow picked it up, all right? It's a very mysterious object. I'm going to link an article about it in the description. You can read it. But again, TLDR, nobody knows what it is and where it comes from. However, we can make some guesses, all right? Because, again, we at least have a date when it was handed over to the Americans. So, in April 1970, there were military exercises of Soviet fleets all over the world, okay? They were called Okean 70, or in Russian, Okean 70, okay? So, they were celebrating 100 years of Lenin, okay? Lenin anniversary, because he was born in April of 1870. So in April 1970, they began these huge exercises. This actually was the biggest naval exercise, not just in Soviet Union, but in all history of humankind. Okay, that's how big it was. So largest in human history. And what else happened in April of 1970? The launch of Apollo 13, alright? Well, that's interesting. To the moon, right? Actually, to the Atlantic. So what most likely happened is that the Soviets, with their ships in the Atlantic, have picked up the mock-up Apollo 13 capsule, some like, I don't know, 300 or maybe 500 kilometers off Florida coast, where it fell after its launch into space, you know, and brought it back to the USSR. That's what happened. Connected to this is the mysterious case of K-8, nuclear submarine of the Soviet Union, which was apparently lost during this operation. So, I mean, interestingly, curiously, it had a nuclear reactor and nuclear torpedoes on board, and they still haven't found the sub. It has sunk, apparently, at least. According to the official version, there was an accident. But curiously, all the crew members were awarded for this. So usually in the Soviet Union, you get executed, you know, for accident on a nuclear submarine. Here you get awarded. Actually, all the crew, not just the captain, not just like the top officers, everyone, which is kind of suspicious as well. So yeah. Interesting case. You may read it up if you wish. You may connect some dots. Nevertheless, so we have Apollo 13 launch on April 11th, and the submarine officially sank on April 12th. Okay, interesting coincidence. Officially an accident again. So this is most likely what Southwind has retrieved in September, the Apollo 13 mock-up capsule. So it couldn't have been just the boilerplate, you know, the lump of iron. They wouldn't bother, you know, traveling for a lump of iron. So when the Americans saw that the capsule is taken by the Soviets, like it was literally lost in the sea, because usually there is a special ship called named Vanguard that is tracking where the stuff falls, so they pick it up. So this time, they never found it, so they figured out something bad has happened, or maybe they actually saw the submarine and actually sank it, but nevertheless, the capsule made it in the Soviet Union. I mean, I don't know the details, okay? I'm not some sort of intelligence, officer. But anyway, when the Americans saw that there's something wrong with the picking up of this capsule, they came up with this exploding oxygen tank kind of story, which we all know, thanks to the movie Apollo 13, right? So to simply claim, they came up with this story to claim that, well, something went wrong and probably we're never gonna see this, these people, you know, again, in this capsule again. But then the Soviets have contacted them. I'll show you a screenshot of who actually did this and when. You can see it's actually April, of 1970. And the story was turned into a miraculous return, again, worthy of making a movie about with, Tom Hanks and stuff, right? So after the news about this capsule handover, by the way, on September 6th, roughly, like, some sources actually vary. There are photos, but people's accounts are varying from like September 5th to September 7th, something like this. So roughly September 6th, let's put it this way. The news about this has leaked into the press, or just reached the press, if you wish, and immediately afterwards, the head of NASA, Thomas Paine, was fired. That happened on September 15th. So it was no boilerplate, my guys. Okay? We can be sure about this. So September 6th, they pick up the capsule. September 15th, head of NASA is fired. Interesting. So, again, returning to the initial question, the Soviet leadership, I emphasize this word, I underline this word, because there were significant restrictions of info in the Soviet Union, understandably. So, the Soviet leadership knew about these mock-up rockets. Again, they've observed the launches and stuff, and all the lunar fakery, you know. So why didn't they do anything about this? That's the question that still stands, all right? But my question in response to this is, why would they, or why should they do anything about this? You know that during the landings, the approaching nuclear parity between the US and the USSR was imminent, which gave rise to the so-called détente policy, right? Or like relaxing tensions policy. So the relations between the countries were warming up significantly. So why would the Soviets make any ruckus about a couple of movies Americans have made? That would make absolutely no sense, right? And as it is, this situation, like we know and you know about the Apollo program, was a good opportunity to like sign some documents, reach some agreements, start some actual cooperation, including in space. You know, like full mutual understanding, you know and we know. We can work together now. We're all in this together, you know. So if you think about it, the whole space race was just a continuation of political opposition. So now that the political strain itself has significantly weakened, there's kind of no need to race, right? So the Soviets have canceled their own space program. By the way, they've already had crewed lunar flyby, with people on an actual spaceship scheduled for July 1969. They've had not a very reliable rocket, the Proton, right? But, still, like, some of their flights were successful already on this rocket, and they've had actual lunar flybys with actual ships being returned to Earth. At least 3 of them have returned successfully. Actually, 4th, the parachute failed. So it kind of returned to Earth, but failed to land safely. So it was the last, 15 kilometers or so was problematic, okay? But again, the 3 ships have landed successfully. One actually with turtles. It was called Zond 5. Maybe I'll link it in the description or something. So it was launched in September 1968, and it was actually the first spacecraft to return from the vicinity of the moon. And the first life form, these turtles were the first life form to visit the vicinity of the moon, all right? So it was definitely shown that it can be done, at least for turtles, all right? And it was the program was underway to do it with humans as well. And they've had the rocket, they've had the ship, they could do it. They just canceled it because, again, it's no longer needed because they already have the détente. They already know the Americans have faked it. So now they have the leverage over the Americans, and they can just talk politically afterwards, right? Plus the nuclear parity. Okay, but now, let's finish with history. Let's teleport to the present moment. Now, what do we have is the dwindling American hegemony, okay? So now, the potential is there for something which I would preliminarily call Lunargate, or maybe even Moongate, if you know what I mean. Actually, there was a stupid book from 1982 called Moongate, and it's so hilarious because the whole premise is based on a misunderstood quote from Wernher von Braun, actually. Von Braun said that there is a point in between Earth and the Moon where their gravity is the same, which is correct. It's called the Lagrange point, right? But somebody thought that at some point, the gravity on the Moon is the same as the gravity on Earth, like on surface of the Earth, right? It's so stupid. But anyway, we'll just rewrite it. We'll forget about this book. Maybe they'll call it Moongate or maybe Lunargate. I don't know. It's up to these whatever intelligence officers to decide how they would brand it. Okay, but what they would do, allegedly, according to me, what there is a possibility for is for some documents to be released about the Apollo program. You know. So the intelligence officers of whatever country, unnamed country, or maybe some private entity, you know, may throw some of these documents from the late 60s into the public domain. So, and why would anyone do that actually? Well, we have a new lunar race happening right now, okay? So we have Elon Musk, we have China, we have Artemis program, we have Lunar Gateway, we have maybe some private entities, I don't know. So my big claim here is that once one of these or other players maybe will get an actual practical possibility of landing people on the moon, the other players in this game, which are catching up, will try to slow down the one who is ahead, okay? So what is the easiest way to slow down your competitor in terms of the moon landing with people is to show it's unsafe, right? And how do you show that it's unsafe is you release the documents which show clearly that Apollo landings were fake, okay? So pretty easy. And if you think about it, since many people were involved in, like, roughly speaking, lunar conspiracy, such documents must be relatively easy to obtain. So if you have the power, again, someone will eventually do it. The only prerequisite for this is that, again, if somebody else, which is any of these entities, will actually get a practical possibility of landing on the moon, then the others will be interested in releasing the Apollo documents, okay? So again, the potential for Lunargate or Moongate is not just here, it is inevitable that it will happen, okay? And you've heard it first, alright? Yeah, so the conclusion, I guess. I mean, hopefully I gave you a couple of interesting anecdotes at least to ponder upon, okay? Of course, there is plenty of other evidence. I mean, you can examine footage, you can examine all kinds of stuff. Actually, I've read a recent paper from, again, Russian, like, ballistic engineers. They've just examined Apollo 11, like, report. What is the report saying? And basically the conclusion is that it is made from home, essentially. This is not a real data. It's somebody just using equations, because that's not how it works in real life. And there are so many inconsistencies within the report itself that it's kind of crazy. But then again, we can discuss it in the comments if you wish. This is also petty. Once you get like the bigger picture, that it doesn't really matter, right? Anyway, the conclusion is such. To my video, at least my position gives you an interesting prediction which may fulfill itself in the coming years, like up to a decade. I actually would hate to give you an exact timeline. Again, one of the prerequisites is that somebody will get a practical, tangible possibility of landing on the moon. Then the Apollo documents, it would make sense for somebody else to release them, basically. That's the idea. So with the current lunar race being underway, the truth about the Apollo missions will be revealed sooner rather than later. This is my opinion. Until then, we just sit and wait for the show. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing. If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.